I want to get down to in the last 2 weeks here. I want to get down to what I think is the relationship between the ethics of Torah and what you would call natural morality. Okay, the morality of Torah, natural morality. And in order to do that, we have to investigate the role of God in morality. Okay, that's primary in the sense is what is the relationship between God and morality? Does there have to be a relationship? And then, with that question, is morality only possible with God? Okay, that's part of the question. And then we have to understand the relationship between reason and revelation. In other words, do we know morality from our own thought or because God tells us? Okay, so that's two issues that we really have to deal with. And then, in terms of looking at where we left off last week and so forth, to really understand the relationship between Torah and natural morality, we have to focus on specific things which, for some reason, halachically seems to be okay, but clearly there is this argument because of Sitei Yasher B'nei Adam, that you should do what's straight in the eyes of man. You should do what's moral. Well, if it's moral, why isn't the halacha? And the classic example of that involves non-Jews. Okay, in the sense of a distinction in certain behavior where we distinguish between a Jew and a non-Jew, Hashavas Aveda. You are obligated to return it to a Jew. A non-Jew, we're talking about a righteous non-Jew. You have a, it's a nice thing to return it to him, according to the Rabbi, but it's not an obligation. What is the reason for that distinction? If it's moral and ethical, it should be moral and ethical for any human being, shouldn't it? Why do you make distinctions between Jew and non-Jew in this ethical realm? And that question really is like the piercing question that sort of says, okay, something's happening here. It's sort of like that's the question that says this structure is totally unique. Because the reality is, in so many ways, distinguishing moral Jew and non-Jew in a moral perspective is problematic to natural morality. Doesn't make any sense. So, why is that so? And that becomes the question to say, not only why is it, well, the Torah says it, but how do you reconcile it with this natural morality? Why is it structured that way? Okay? So that seems to be the question that's piercing, that sort of we have to answer. And the two issues we have to deal with is really what is the relationship between reason and revelation. Okay. So really to answer this, really to discuss this idea, we really have to ask is what is morality? What are ethics? What are morality? What is morality? And what I'm really saying is, what do we perceive to be moral? You see, moral is not just something that's smart to do. Moral has a certain connotation to it. If you're doing something because it's smart to do it, maybe an act that the act is moral, but you wouldn't say it's really motivated by the moral drive or motivated by morality. For example, if someone says, listen, I'm going to return this lost article because I see it belongs to Bill Gates. And boy, if I return this lost article to Bill Gates, there's a possibility that he might give me a reward, or it'll be good to be in good with Bill Gates. He'll like me. Maybe down the road that will come in as something that will mean something. So you return the lost article. Is returning that lost article moral? Well, the act is moral. You return the lost article, it's ethical. But you say that's not really the motivation of ethics. Ethics is sort of, you do it because it's the right thing, or it's the good. What does that mean? What does it mean you do it for that reason? So the real question is, what is this moral perception? What is this moral? What is this the moral drive and so forth? So that really has to be the starting question. So in many ways, there's attempts, like, in philosophy, there's attempts to define ethics, what's the right thing to do. So philosophers talk about it in terms of ethics being the smart thing to do. Like, well, the reason you want to help your neighbor is because it's better to be communal than to think in terms of individual. Because you might need your neighbor's help one day. So it's smart to create a communal structure. But there's something about morals where you just sort of have this gut feeling this is the right thing to do. Okay? So what you're saying, what does that gut feeling mean? In a certain way, that really is the question people ask of atheists. Sort of feel that atheists sort of feel it's the if an atheist feels it's wrong to do something, right? You can ask him, why is it wrong? Well, it's wrong. It's just immoral. Why? How do you know it's immoral? How do you know it's wrong? So, in a certain way, the atheist is always challenged because why do you do this?
Because they're going to rely on man. They don't have God to worry about. Right. They're going to rely on man, so they're going to think about it from a very utilitarian approach to say,
right.
You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Right.
I return your thing, you're going to return my thing.
Right.
You're so heavily invested in expecting equally moral behavior amongst your fellow.
But do you think atheists actually think about utilitarianism?
Well,
the atheists,
they've got to rely on man. If they don't rely on
right.
God.
But the fact is, I bet you go up to an atheist and say, be utilitarian, like it's obviously in your best interest. That's an argument for it, but the reason they're really saying it is because they sort of feel that it's right. They just sort of feel it. It seems to be moral. And if they're just doing it because of utilitarian, that sort of takes away from that moral feeling. So that's the problem with atheists. It's interesting because I was watching, there was a video that came up on CNN.com. It seems to be, I just saw it today, it seems to be that there's a sign, a billboard that was taken out on the Jersey side of the Lincoln Tunnel, I think it's the Lincoln Tunnel, where people come out to see this sign. Okay, it's a myth, right? Okay, make this the season of reason. Okay, and sponsored by some atheist council. So now there's a billboard when you come out on the Manhattan side, it was put up by the Catholics League, that says, it's real. Do something with Jesus or whatever, right? Okay, celebrate Jesus or whatever. And they had this little discussion between the atheists and the not really a discussion, they were interviewing the atheists, interviewed the Catholic guy, and it was very brief, very, very short. But the atheist says, in America we have it that 15% of America is really atheists. That's the one we know. We believe there's a lot of people out there who actually are closet atheists. And we want them to come out of the closet. It's important they come out of the closet. And I showed it to my wife, and my wife says, why does he care? What's his point? They should come out of the closet. It's like, why should they come out of the closet? What's his motivation to declare who you are or not? But this guy spoke as if this is something people should do. The truth is he's really trying to say, like, be honest and so forth and come out and blah, blah, blah. Somehow he's appealing to some good, some drive within the person, what you might call something that's tied to morality. And you look at this and say, well, Why should you care about it? See, that's where God gets into the picture. So people say, well, once you believe in God, then you can say, well, the moral drive is God's way of telling you what's right, what's good. Okay. And therefore you have that drive because God gave it to you. Fine. But still, how do I know that this is good? Okay, so I have a drive that says it's nice to be honest, but how do I know it's really right to be honest? Right? I have a feeling inside me that I should be honest. So you can ask the atheist, so you have this feeling inside you, why should you care about your feelings? In fact, where do you get this feeling from?
It's like when they teach ethics in business school, and the reason why you shouldn't steal, embezzle, etc., is not because of a moral distance from it, but really because the likelihood eventually of being caught and thrown in jail and having a worse situation. The punishment is worse than the.
That's the answer that's given to explain. Well, really, you do it because you're afraid of punishment. The truth is most people really don't do it for that reason. Most people do it because they feel it's the right thing to do. A lot of people, there's so many cases of this where they really show that people basically act in a good way. There's a small population that doesn't act in a good way, and therefore you have to have, fear of crime to get to keep those people in line.
Or some
right.
consequence. If
right.
you were
right.
unfaithful to your wife,
right,
then it's going to eventually come back to harm you, right?
But the fact is that people feel this idea, and the question is, even the atheist does it, and when he's motivated with his drive. So for the atheist, where does this drive come from? So the theist says, the believer says, it comes from God. But then what does it represent? But the thing is that if it comes from God, it's a nice way of looking at it, but really the issue is what they're dealing with is an aspect of a feeling. What you're saying is that God defends some aspect of morality. It sort of says, I have a feeling, but by believing in God, I feel this feeling gives it some validity. But the point is, you don't really say, why does God define it as significant? Because why should I return that lost article? Well, because I feel like it, because I feel that that it's the right thing to do. Okay, so why should I listen to the feeling that it's the right thing to do? Oh, because God's put it inside, or because I'm afraid of punishment. No, because that would take away from the morality aspect. Because what I'm saying is I feel it inside me, and I give this some kind of validity because I believe God put that inside me, put that moral feeling inside me. Okay, and therefore I'm going to say it has a definition to it. God put it inside me, and therefore I'm going to do it. And the atheist is left, well, why should you follow the feeling? I don't know why this feeling has any validity. You just happen to have a feeling. But even if you say that God put it inside you, this feeling, what does it mean, the feeling? What's behind this feeling? That's really such a powerful question, in the sense of, what is this feeling we have? What does it represent? If I'm hungry, I know I need food, right? If I feel pain, I know I have to avoid a certain situation. But the point is if I feel that I have to act, and there's so many cases, I have to act in a moral way, even though it's self-damaging, something like that, right? Why? Because I feel it's the right thing to do. So from where? Where do you get that idea that it's the right thing to do? And what makes you really want to follow through on that? Okay. So the point is, though, is this where God gets involved, in the sense that God gives some kind of justification to that feeling. Sort of says to people, well, if you believe in God, then I can sort of give some kind of justification for the meaning. But the point is, it doesn't really give any more validity to the feeling. It says, well, God put it inside me, but what does that feeling mean? Why? Let's take an example such as, in our world, let's say a person's unfaithful, right? Person's feeling he has to be faithful to his or her spouse, right? And he's in a situation where he can not be faithful, and no one will know. It won't come out. No one will know. It's totally like you're not worried about the repercussions and so forth. So why does a person say, no, I got to be faithful in that situation? There's no repercussions. So because you feel you have to be faithful. So the person, the atheist, you ask them questions. So you feel you have to be faithful. There's a lot of feelings you have. Why do you follow through in it? But the theist, I feel I have to be faithful because God says I should be, because I have this feeling, and therefore it's God. I say that feeling must come from God, and therefore it gives validity to that feeling. But you still haven't answered the question of why be faithful. Why is it right to follow that feeling? Okay.
I mean, you signed a contract.
Yeah, but so
you are bound.
You're right, but even when you talk like that, why are you bound by it, and so forth?
You have willingly bound yourself to that other individual through exclusivity, and it's an agreement that you both reach.
Right. So what you're saying is now you're giving an idea where God tells you that you've bound yourself to a person, and I expect you to follow through in it. Right?
Yeah.
That's what you defend by morality. You see, the thing is like this: what came first, the feeling, or this statement from God? See, in a revelational system, God tells you this, and they say, okay, now I know what God wants me to do. Now I'll put my feelings in line with this. But for most people, when they talk about their moral feelings, they have a moral feeling, and then afterwards they say, hey, God cares about this, which sort of justifies what they already have as a feeling.
Right. I mean, maybe you have to look at it in terms of the, not just repercussions, the actual implications of having a moral system. That what it is intended to create is a stable, cohesive, well-functioning, mutually respectful society where there is an appreciation of the rule of law and the fact that there are boundaries, the fact that there are things to respect, and that is essential for the proper functioning. And individuals who are self-regulating of their behavior are far more effective than having massive police forces externally to police you.
Okay.
So you look at it in terms of the, what are the implications of a system like this? And if you look at compare historically, ethnically, you compare Jews to other ethnic or religious groups, you find certain lower incidences of certain negative behaviors.
Right.
Right. You may find higher incidences of other things, overeating, whatever. But there are things that you can only judge them by the effect that they create over time. So a stable family environment is an immediate consequence, an immediate implication that you get out of
so what you're saying is that morals really are I don't use the word self-serving, but they really are beneficial. Abiding by a moral system is really beneficial.
The fact that everybody is buying into that. If you have a system where everyone agrees, everyone understands and agrees, plays by the same rules, then things can function. When you have every individual deciding for themselves what the rules of the game are, and what is mutter and what is asur, then you have chaos, right? And you end up having to spend all kinds of energy and resources in a society to police and incarcerate and patrol and everything else.
Right. The thing is, though, is that the relationship between what a person feels about this moral feeling. In other words, If I feel hungry, I feel I need food. That satisfies it. What happens in this moral idea is that when the person performs this action, he's not thinking of, and this is necessary for society's functioning and so forth and so forth, because that's already getting utilitarian. He's sort of feeling this is the right thing to do. And he's not thinking of the right thing just in terms of utilitarian. He sort of feels objectively it's the right thing to do. It's something that is correct. Well, it obviously seems to be the right behavior for you. In other words, something where you sort of say, this is the way you're supposed to act. In other words, the human being who's honest, it's not just simply, it's good to be honest because if everyone's honest, we'll have a better functioning society. There's something where a person feels, I'm doing what I should be doing. This is the right thing. This is honest. And therefore, the way you justify that feeling, because God is giving you that feeling, is a way of knowing the way you should be. Okay? But the point is they still haven't explained, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean?
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be for you?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much.
You need it?
No, you can take it and give it back. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. That's what I'm trying to get at. See, I think what I'm doing is that you're right about all these arguments and so forth, but the definition that it helps society does not really explain the feeling. Okay, a person, I gave that example about being faithful to your wife and so forth, or to your spouse. I'm trying to say is you feel it's the right thing for you to do. What does that mean? What does it mean it's the right thing for you to do? You feel it's not because, and you say, well, it's the right thing because you have to maintain your commitment. Well, that's what you're saying. It's the right thing for me to do is to maintain my commitment. No one will find out. It's totally in a vacuum. It's what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. No one knows anything about it. And the fact is you can walk away and say it's fine. But the point is, there's something inside you says, I'm not doing the right thing. And that's really what does that feeling come to? What does that feeling mean? And that's where the atheist says, well, what does that feeling mean? Especially the atheist. So someone who believes in God, that feeling means I believe in, that God told me it's the right thing to do. But why is it the right thing to do? Because it's right. That's a tautology. Because you should be honest. Why? You have to get to a further issue. So the thing is that I wrote something a few years ago about the relationship of God and morality, and I have one here.
I think I have one left.
Right. Okay. So I'm just going to read it. I want to read and explain it because what it's going to lead to is a point of what I think is very significant, but of what we understand in terms of a Jewish perspective of morality. See, the relationship between faith and morality is a continuous study, discussion, and debate. For those who contend that without belief in the divine being there's no possibility of ensuring a moral order, there are many nuances to assertion. People say you need God in order to have morality, right? One is that without the objective declaration of right and wrong by a supreme being, morality wavers and becomes subject to the whims of the population that it wishes to instruct. It's the declaration that moral code comes from God that gives the code stability and stature. Okay, it seems that you need a faith in God to utterly declare what is moral. Okay? In other words, people say you need God to have an objective morality. Otherwise it will just be subjective and determinate and so forth. Okay? Now, second nuance is that without the possibility of divine judge, morality is not enforceable. Okay? The final answer to one question you need to be moral is the avoidance of punishment, which you said beforehand. But it would seem that you need faith in God to enforce what is moral. Okay. fact is that if man doesn't punish, you have to say you'll get it in the end. Or you tell the guy, hey, if you aren't faithful to your wife, God will punish you, right? Point is, it still doesn't deal with why is that right and wrong. Third nuance concerns the value we give to morality. Okay, the choice of moral can be viewed as simply another choice that confronts a human being. One chooses to be moral, another chooses not to be. Both can be seen as simply following their desires. It is the perception that one drive, the drive to be moral, is of a higher nature sparked by the divine that often drives the moral choice. It would seem you need a faith in God to value what is moral. These are all part of the argument for the need of God in morality. Okay? Others disagree and assert that the moral order of human society can be attained even without belief. The issue before us, however, is not this disagreement. The issue rather is a connection between faith and morality. What I mean by that is people are trying to say, I'm moral, and God will defend my morality. I have a morality, okay? And if I believe in God to defend morality, that would make sense. So therefore, I believe this is moral, and because God believes it's moral. So therefore, that makes it, oh wow, it's really something powerful. And you can sit there and say, if you don't do it, God will punish you. And the other thing is I can definitely say this is what is moral because God told me. Now, because God defends it. Now, the truth is that's where you have a lot of problems also, because in many ways, the evil arises from people who think they're being moral. People who think it's moral and this is what the right thing is to do. A lot of times we have suffered at their hands because they don't think. If you think in terms of, now, you get into the issues of revelation and reason, but if you don't think in terms of this morality, there's people out there fighting for the Taliban who believe it's absolutely moral to do what they're doing. It's a moral idea to be terrorists. It's the right thing to do. And they throw this thing, and God tells me to do it. Okay, and those people who don't feel it, so they're defying God. So in a certain way, God can also be played with, right?
Can we if we substitute the word conscience for morality, is that?
No, I think what you're saying is that it is a conscience of morality, but the fact is,
you first have to have, in the sense of conscience, being self-awareness, first of all, as a primary factor, right? And something that then governs you, that you feel a sense of ownership of your actions, right? Which is the second sort of component to morality, and therefore then whatever you're going to do, you're going to have to judge what you're doing, whether it's right or wrong.
Right, but the fact is that the question is that yardstick, and the question is, however you're evaluating right and wrong. What does right and wrong mean? What does it mean? What does right and wrong mean? What do those terms mean? Well, God likes it. If it's right, God likes it. If it doesn't, if God doesn't like it, it must be wrong. But that seems to be arbitrary. But it's really what you're looking at is, why is this moral? And not in terms of a societal, not in terms of the societal utilitarian answer, but what really is that morality thing? Okay? So the fact is that a lot of times people argue for the need of God in morality is, I already know it's moral. We have a sense of moral, and in order to make this morality have some kind of power or some kind of validity, I throw God into the mix. Like, I know right and wrong, and if I believe in God, that will give me an answer of right and wrong. Of course, God says what I feel right and wrong is what's right and wrong, right? All it does is God defends my own perspective. That's the way most people are in morality. But if you believe in revelation, yes, if you have a revelational perception, then God tells you what's right and wrong. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to feel it. The question I'm asking here is in terms of our feelings, and sometimes all God does is basically we have the feelings and we turn to God for some way of justifying them, right? You better do it, some way of giving those feelings some validity. You better do it, or else God's going to punish you. Okay, and well, God must have given you those feelings because He's telling you what's right and wrong. But it does give you a definition of what that right and wrong is. Okay? Okay. So the fact is, okay, there's a distinction, okay, that we talked about the distinction between Jew and non-Jew. So the fact is that there's a further distinction in the non-Jew. There's a non-Jew who is an idolater and a non-Jew who is righteous. And the halacha makes a distinction between the non-Jew who's an idolater and the non-Jew who's righteous. Same way it makes distinctions for Jews. It makes distinctions between Jews who are righteous and Jews who are idolaters. Okay, a mumer, a base of the hachas, a mazid, also loses a lot of the benefits of being Jewish. But the Meiri presents an interesting idea. The Meiri says that, and this is really I'm leading up to, the Meiri, and one place he mentions it in Meiri on Gittin 61a, he mentions that people who have dat, which means to be religion, faith, they're the people that you can treat in a certain way positively, because it has a lot to do with the fact that they're going to be moral. The idolater is really going to be barbarian. There was the Meiri presents an idea that says a little bit further than that, that the barbarian, idolater means barbarian, okay? Following dat means you're going to be ethical, okay? And therefore he says people who believe in some dat, some faith that's more developed, they're going to be a little bit more ethical, and they're the non-Jews we can relate to very well. So the Meiri talks about it. He says the non-Jews that are distinguished in the Gemara is you don't have to treat them so well. They're non-Jews who are idolaters, and because they're idolaters, they're not going to be moral. But if you are Jewish, if you are a believer in a God and have some sophisticated religious beliefs, then you're going to be moral. And those moral individuals who have some theology, they're the people you can treat fine. They're a different category of non-Jew, which is not what the Gemara is talking about. What the Meiri has done is connected that an idolater can't be ethical. To really be ethical, you have to be a person who is within a concept of a belief in God. Okay? And this is extremely important in Meiri. It's not just God, it's that oneness in God. See, what happens is the Meiri says there's a complete change in morality. And the idolater cannot be ethical. But someone who is theistic, and especially believe in one God, is going to be ethical. And that's the real question. Why can't an idolater be ethical? Why would idolater be, for sure, not be ethical? Why do when we think of paganism, we think of barbarianism? Okay? And there's people who take this further and say, and once you see a people who are moral, then even if their religion looks like it's pagan, it can't be. Because pagans can't be moral.
Well, they have their own value system, right? Whether they're polytheistic or whether they're monotheistic. But they're looking at it as their form of avoda is kind of an exchange, right? It's a quid pro quo.
That's idolatry.
Right, I pay off the god. Well, but polytheist is I hedge my bets. I'm not sure each one has a domain, and I want to hedge my bets that I'm in good terms with each of them, and so I pay them each off by whatever form of service I do. But it's a very utilitarian approach.
Yeah, but the fact
is,
pragmatic. You're right. Right, it's the same approach.
Enough to satisfy them, right, and to maintain, my status. I'm not in trouble.
Right.
Because they can
right.
harm me.
Right.
So he still has some. He's not totally valueless.
No,
he has a very utilitarian approach.
But the point is what you're getting at is that polytheistic system gives a certain consciousness. You relate to the gods from your needs. Okay? See, when you start thinking in terms of the gods, this God's intelligent, that God's war, so I'm trying to think which one can serve my purpose best. Right? Because I'm at the center, and I'm going to try and pick and choose which gods I want to relate to, or how I prioritize the gods I'm interested in. Right? Okay? What really happens, it really flows from the individual and from the personality of the individual. Okay? See, the thing is we're talking about this in terms of drives and so forth, is on a certain level, if morality is just another drive and another feeling. So, if you have a moral drive, an ethical drive, and you have the drive, let's say you have this beautiful woman you want to sleep with, so you have your sexual drive is on high, and you're married, and your ethical drive is saying no, you can't sleep with her because you want to be honest, and you have an ethical drive to be honest. Okay, so you sort of look at this and say, well, okay, there's my ethical drive to be honest up against my sexual drive to sleep with this woman. Won't be any repercussions if I sleep with this woman. So why should my ethical drive overtake my sexual drive? It's just two drives.
Well, in the same way that the morality is of a divine external.
We're not going to divine.
No, but I'm saying in the same way that the divine overrides the individual, in the same way that the moral decision.
You're already jumping to God. I'm talking from the polytheistic perception.
Yeah.
Okay, if ethics or moral drive is just a drive, then all that occurs is it's another drive amongst many drives. Hey, I choose to follow. I have a conflict between drives. I choose to satisfy the drive, my sexual drive, over my ethical drive. Okay? That was my choice. It becomes down to your choice. And really in the polytheistic system, what you're getting at is utilitarian. It's not that. It really becomes your choice. You're taking care of that God because you want to make sure that God doesn't hurt you. You're involved with that God because what you really think of is what I want, what I think is good. And part of the things that I want may be moral and ethical. I want a society where everyone loves each other. I like honesty. I think everyone should be honest. I have a drive to be honest. I think it's good to be honest. Everyone should be honest. But it's from my drive. So another guy says, yeah, I'd like to be honest, but I like money too. So you choose A over B. So a society punishes you. But really on a certain level, why should one drive supersede another drive? When you throw God into it, you sort of say, well, God's is telling you that this drive should supersede that drive. Okay, so that's one way of looking at it. That's like a little angel and a little devil, right? You have two drives, and God sort of tells you that you should pick drive A versus drive D for the devil, right? Yeah. Okay, but basically that, and why? Because God will punish you otherwise. But the fact is let's say there's no punishment, right? God, I have a drive A, a drive B, or, this other drive. Okay, why should I choose drive A over drive B? Okay, so God tells me to choose it, but the fact is that, but why is it necessary? See, when it comes down to is, if it's all about my just having a moral perception, a moral drive, like I want to be honest, right? Then that basically just becomes one drive against another drive. I want a diet, I also want that cream puff. Well, which one's going to win that day? It's up to your drive, so forth. Okay? Sometimes you say, hey, it's a better argument this way, some the other. It's all a matter of drives. Some drives are we define some drives as better than other drives. Well, who says? Okay? The fact is what the Meiri is really pointing out is that's really the polytheistic system. It's not true that polytheists didn't have some aspect of morality to them. There's a medrash that says Jezebel. It's one of the greatest Rishayim, right? Basically, it says that she was always very comforting to the bereaved. She saw Levaya, she went out and was the mess, and if she saw a chasana, she went out to mitzvah chasana and kala. Her drive to care about people, I want to help out people. Okay, I want to do things. I see this all the time. I'm driven by this good drive.
Or was it duty because she's a queen?
Well, and she wants that regal perception. But the fact is she's driven. The fact that the truth is that she does a moral act, basically because she feels from herself, I'm driven for that moral act. It may be because it's moral, but the key is that it all comes down to one drive against another drive. Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov are not that. That's really what you're representing with one God. And that's really the key point in understanding it. Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov is not that. Because the fact is there's one God. And everything comes from God. So the point is that you have these two drives because God gave you these two drives. Okay? And when God says, choose drive A over drive B, what he's saying is this is the structure of the drives that I created. So what's happening is once you start believing in one God, what's happening is that you're seeing that it's not a matter of drive versus drive, it's a matter of structure. In the sense that there's a place for this, there's a place for that, but it's a matter of structure in that oneness. I'm not turning to God for this reason, that reason. God is the same one who created all the drives, and somehow when he says that this drive should ignore, it's important to be honest. What he's saying is when you have a conflict between your drive to be moral and honest and your drive for sexuality, I'm telling you to take this one, it's because somehow in the structure of my oneness, this is the way it's supposed to be. The oneness of God basically says all reality comes together in that oneness. And that oneness as it applies to us, is structured. All the drives have their place. So it's not just simply, I have a drive to be moral, I have a drive to do chesed versus my drive to not do chesed. Sometimes you're not supposed to do chesed. Sometimes doing chesed is wrong. But we think that's a good drive. No, you know something? Sometimes what we think to be the moral drive is not the moral drive. Sometimes it really has to be something else. Because what it is, it's a matter of structuring between those drives. There's no drive that is 100% always the correct drive.
So maybe it's the very fact that you're having that internal struggle in Israel, that we are, the act, it is the act of struggling, of first of all being conscious that there is a moral question to our behavior, that there is a moral dimension to it in the first place.
But that moral dimension is not just that this is moral, to be honest. See, the fact is morality is not simply another term for another drive. It is the yardstick of oneness. What morality really is that sense of how this world comes together. See, it's a very interesting morale. Morale in Gararia says, what's the concept of Tov? It's talking about Tov and Ra. Morale says Tov is oneness. It's unity. It's oneness. Ra, by extension, is chaos. It's entropy. The fact is that when you have oneness, it's you take this world and you structure it. When you have drives, it's like all over the place. And it might be that a person has a drive, and he has a very strong drive to be, let's say, Baal Chesed. So he'll keep doing Chesed. So they say, gee, that person has a strong moral drive to care for others. The point is, as long as it's just another strong moral drive to care for others, that's not what it's about. At some point in time, you'd say, I have a strong moral drive to care for others. I have this drive. I also have, there's other drives to me. And I have to look to understand that the real overriding moral arch is what is the correct structure in defining those drives. And that comes about when you perceive that the drives ultimately aren't in conflict. The drives all come from the one God. So morality goes through a shift. It goes through a change when you start believing in one God. Okay? It's no longer, not only that, when you get right to the one God. And in certain ways, this is an issue with when you talk in terms of Christianity in certain ways, in the sense that everyone talks about the Trinity not being one. The fact is they've given the devil a tremendous amount of authority. Okay, and therefore they say everything bad comes from the devil. Basically, the strength of our oneness, the purity of our oneness, is everything comes from God. And therefore everything has to be put together in that oneness. It's a tremendous challenge. It's beyond human reason. Okay? That's why oneness is totally incomprehensible to us. Everything comes from them. There's no parts. It all comes from the same source. How does a garbage dump and a beautiful sunset come from the same source? How does a tsunami and a nice warm beach come from the same source? You know, they all come from the same source. So somehow there's some structure here to the world, and that comes in the idea of also. So the truth is that actually what I'm saying is that there's two different types of drives. We have drives, moral drives. Drive to be honest, drive to do this, drive to do this, drive to do chesed, all these things. The fact is that every one of those drives, right, all have a place. But the ultimate moral definition, where God gets into it, is telling how the world should be structured. And the fact that it's not just a matter of choosing drive A over drive B, it's a matter of understanding which drive, or you have to choose drive A over B, but which drive really represents the unity of existence, my unity of existence. Therefore, it's also tied to me. It's not just tied to society, it's tied to me. My actions, what is creating my unity of putting everything together? If I have two drives in conflict, they both come from the same source. Which is the one that's supposed to take priority now? So morality becomes the yardstick of the oneness, which is the yardstick of determining proper behavior between drives. And that creates, and that I think is what the Mir is saying. Polytheists cannot be ultimately moral because it's all dependent upon their drives. Right? Only one who has some aspect of this faith, and therefore has a much more sophisticated understanding of life, and says everything comes from one God, how does that work? And therefore changes the question that it's no longer a battle between two drives. It's a battle of what does right mean? What reflects the oneness of God? That really becomes what the definition of right becomes. Okay, why is this right? Because somehow that fits into the concept of the order of this world in terms of oneness. And that's how God gives morality meaning. Because of that oneness, it comes together. Okay, and next week I want to take that one step further to create a structure for what I think is ultimately why, going back to the other question of this idea of why you had to have the difference between halacha and the yashar b'nei adam, because it's a matter of balancing the oneness, because oneness reflects a whole aspect of structure. So then what is the structure that is being presented by the halacha?